They say the dead don't feel fear. I suppose that's true because in that moment, standing on my front porch with a rifle in my hands and 3 armed men staring me down under the pale moonlight, I wasn't afraid. Not of dying, not of them. What I felt was something far more dangerous. Conviction. The tallest one, a brute with a scar slicing through his cheek, called out again. "We ain't got all night, lady. Hand over the boy and nobody gets hurt." He didn't know it, but the boy he was talking about, the one hiding behind a broken wall of hay in my barn, was already the reason I'd come back to life. 3 days ago, I wouldn't have lifted a finger for anyone. 3 days ago, I didn't have a reason to get out of bed, let alone fight. But now that boy was all I had left worth protecting. The rifle trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from cold and something else. Grief turned to fire. Loneliness turned to armor. I didn't know much about the men in front of me, except that they were the kind who took what they wanted and left no witnesses. I'd seen their type before when my neighbors lost their land and no one came to help. But they'd made one mistake. They came to the wrong farm, and they asked for the wrong child. I shifted my stance, finger resting light on the trigger. My late husband's rifle was old, but it still barked loud. And I had more than enough bullets to make my point. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around," I said, my voice like dry stone. "He stays here. And if you want to press your luck," I raised the barrel slightly. "You'll find out what happens when you corner someone with nothing left to lose." That was the night I stood between a broken boy and the men who wanted to destroy him. But to understand why I did it, you'd have to know what happened 3 days earlier before he ever knocked on my gate. My name is Eleanor Graves, and for 3 years this farm was my coffin. They say time heals. Whoever said that never had to bury 2 sons and the man she loved with her own hands. After the fever swept through Dust Pine Valley and the flood took what was left, I stopped planting, stopped fixing, stopped caring. What's the point of mending fence posts when no one's coming home? What's the point of lighting a fire when there's no one left to warm? The house sagged in on itself like an old woman's spine. The windows cracked and never got replaced. My husband's boots sat by the door, still muddy from the last time he wore them. I never had the heart to move them. It was easier to let the dust bury them. Food came from a tin if I remembered to eat. Most days I didn't. There were no visitors, no neighbors. I'd made sure of that. Grief is a kind of poison. It spills from your mouth when you try to speak and chokes out anything kind left in you. So I stayed silent. Just me, the wind, and the slow, steady sound of wood rotting in the sun. Some nights I'd sit on the porch in that old rocking chair, the one Jacob built before the war, and think about lighting a fire in the hearth, not for warmth, but just to see if I still could. I never did. I used to be someone. I was a wife, a mother, a woman with strong hands and stronger hopes. But when hope dies, it doesn't go quietly. It drags every piece of you down with it. Then, one morning, something changed. It wasn't the weather still dry as bone. It wasn't the sky still the same colorless blue. It was a sound, soft, hesitant. A knock. 3 quick taps on the front gate like a child too scared to ask permission. I thought it was a ghost at first, some cruel echo of the past. But when I stepped onto the porch, I saw him. A small boy no older than 12 standing behind the fence with a worn satchel and dirt on his cheeks. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there, like he didn't want to disturb me, like he'd already decided he didn't belong. I could have turned around, could have gone back inside and shut the door like I always did. But something about the way he stood, his shoulders, stiff eyes, too old for his face, made my feet move before my brain could stop them. He looked like my youngest Thomas just before the sickness took him. Same pale hair, same way of holding in his breath, like the world might forget him if he stayed quiet long enough. I walked to the gate, not even sure why. Maybe I thought I was dreaming. Maybe I just wanted to feel something besides the weight of time. The boy didn't speak until I asked him what he wanted. Even then, his voice was barely louder than the wind. He said someone in town told him I might need help on the farm. He didn't ask for food, didn't ask for shelter, just offered to work. I almost laughed. What did this boy think he could fix here? This wasn't a farm anymore. It was a graveyard with a roof. But then he looked at me. And for the first time in years, someone didn't see a broken widow. He saw a woman who might still have something left to give. I told myself I was just giving him bread and water, just long enough to send him on his way. But the moment he stepped through that gate, the silence I'd lived with for so long cracked in something else. Something dangerous slipped in. Hope. His name was Micah. He didn't offer a last name, and I didn't ask. Out here, folks who show up with half a name usually have double the reasons to keep the rest hidden. He walked through my gate slow, like stepping onto holy ground. His eyes flicked around the yard, taking in the leaning fence posts, the broken coop, the field that hadn't seen a plow in years. But he didn't flinch, didn't scoff. He looked at that wreck of a farm like it was something that could still grow. Micah didn't say much as I led him to the house. Just limped beside me, his left leg dragging ever so slightly like an old injury that had long since stopped healing. But he kept pace, never asked to rest. I opened the door, bracing myself for judgment. The inside of my home was no better than the outside dust, caked every surface, cobwebs draped from the ceiling like funeral veils, and the fireplace hadn't known fire in a year. I expected him to turn around. But he just stepped in, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you." I hadn't heard those words in so long, I nearly forgot what they meant. I went to the kitchen and scraped together what passed for a meal, a chunk of hard bread, a jar of preserved peaches from better times, and 2 tin cups of well water. He sat across from me at the table, hands folded politely like someone raised to remember manners no matter how hungry they were. And oh, he was hungry. I watched him try to hide it, chewing slow swallowing like it hurt to take more than he thought he deserved. I took a bite of the bread myself, mostly out of guilt. It was the first time I'd shared a meal with anyone since my neighbor stopped checking in after the second winter. That silence we sat in it wasn't awkward. It was familiar. Like 2 people who both knew what it meant to lose everything and still wake up the next day anyway. Afterward, Micah asked if he could look at the barn. Said he knew livestock. I almost laughed, but something about his tone. He wasn't trying to impress me. He meant it. We walked outside, the evening sun stretching long shadows across the field. The barn was a mess, roof, half-collapsed floor split in 3 places, a family of skunks nesting in one corner. But he walked through it with care, pointing out what could be salvaged. "This beam's still good," he said, tapping it with knuckles too thin. "That post just needs bracing. And if we clear this section here, you might get chickens back in before first snow." I leaned on the door frame and watched him like someone watching a bird build a nest in the skeleton of a dead tree. Hope in the wrong place. But maybe, just maybe, hope in the right hands. He turned to me then, brushing dust off his trousers. "I know it's a lot," he said, "but I can help. I've done it before." There was something in his voice that made me want to believe him. Not confidence. Desperation wrapped in quiet dignity. He wouldn't say where he came from, wouldn't name the town or the folks he used to stay with. Just said they weren't safe anymore. That's all, not safe anymore. I didn't press. The scars on his leg told me more than words ever could. That night, I gave him a blanket, and let him sleep on the old cot near the fireplace. He didn't complain, just curled up like a dog too used to sleeping cold. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open listening to his breathing. It was strange how quickly a stranger's breath could sound like comfort in a house that hadn't known another heartbeat in years. I told myself he'd be gone by morning, that I'd pack him a meal, send him on his way, maybe give him a few coins if I could spare it. But deep down, I already knew that boy wasn't passing through. He'd come home, and something in me, something I thought died years ago, had opened its eyes again. The first 2 nights passed quiet. Too quiet. Micah worked hard for a boy his size. He cleaned the coop without being asked, hauled water with that crooked leg like it didn't matter, and patched the chicken wire using bits of rusted fence he found by the shed. He didn't complain, not once. But there was always a tightness in his shoulders, like he expected a shadow to fall on him at any moment. I knew that kind of tension. It's how I used to sleep with a rifle beside my bed after Jacob died, half hoping someone would come for me, half terrified they actually would. Then on the 3rd night, I saw the lights, faint at first, like fireflies on the ridge. But they moved too steadily, too deliberate. Torches. 4, maybe 5. I stepped out onto the porch and spotted Micah already outside, eyes locked on that same ridge, fists clenched. He didn't ask if he could stay. He didn't say a word. He just whispered, "They found me." I brought him inside, locked the doors, pulled down the old rifle I hadn't touched in years. And then I made tea, because sometimes the only thing you can do when the world's about to break open is put a kettle on. That's when he told me the truth. Micah's uncle had taken him in after the accident. His parents died when their wagon rolled on a mountain pass. The uncle wasn't cruel at first, just overwhelmed. But after he remarried, things changed. The new wife didn't want another mouth to feed, especially one that limped. So when his uncle racked up gambling debts with a man named Silas Bragg, he offered Micah instead of money. Said the boy could work it off. Said nobody would miss him. Silas wasn't a simple debt collector. He ran something nastier, moving unwanted children to mining camps, ranches in the Badlands, or worse. Sold like tools. No names, no papers, just missing faces. Micah ran the night he heard them talking about chaining him up before transport. He took a satchel, a half loaf of bread, and walked for 2 days. He remembered someone mentioning my name in town. The widow who didn't talk to nobody, but still had a roof. I wanted to scream, to find that uncle and tear him apart piece by piece. But all I could do was sit there, hands wrapped around that chipped mug, and let the boy speak. He wasn't crying, but his voice cracked when he said, "I thought maybe I could help you fix things here, so I wouldn't get taken again." God help me, I didn't cry either. But I think my soul cracked in half. When the knock came, it was almost gentle. Just a soft rap on the front gate, followed by silence. Then a voice, low, scratchy, too calm. "We know he's here." Micah grabbed my arm. "Please," he whispered, "don't get involved." But I already was. I pulled him into the barn behind a stack of moldy hay bales. Told him to stay put no matter what he heard. And then I walked back out into the night. The men were there, 3 of them. One had a scar down his face like someone had tried to carve a map into his skin. He was Silas. I knew it the second he smiled. He looked around my broken yard and said, "Pretty big place for one old woman. Maybe you could use some company." I kept the rifle low, but ready. "There's no boy here," I said. "Only ghosts and a woman too tired to be scared." One of his men moved toward the barn. I stepped in front of him. He laughed and shoved me aside. But I grabbed his coat and yanked hard enough to make him stumble. Silas's face changed then, like a wolf sniffing out defiance. He stepped closer and said, "You sure you want to make this your fight?" I didn't answer, just stared him down until he backed off and spit in the dirt. "We'll be back," he said. "Next time you better have an answer." As they rode off into the night, I felt my knees go weak. But I didn't fall. Micah stepped out from the barn, face pale. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have come." I walked up to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and told him the truth. "I've been alone a long time, boy. But no one deserves to be hunted like a dog." I looked into his eyes. "I won't let them take you." That was the moment I stopped being the woman waiting to die and became someone willing to fight again. Not for land, not for pride, but for a child no one else would claim, even if it meant risking everything I had left, even if all I had was a name, a rifle, and an old farmhouse with just enough courage to stand. The night after Silas left, neither of us slept. I sat by the window with my husband's rifle across my lap ears, trained on every creak and whisper the house made. Micah dozed in fits by the fireplace, his little body jerking awake at every gust of wind that shook the shutters. He kept apologizing for bringing danger, for needing help, for existing. I told him to hush. What I didn't say, because I couldn't say it without my voice cracking, was that for the first time in years, I was glad someone needed me. Just before dawn, I spotted movement down by the trail. Not torchlight this time. Lanterns, carriages. I woke Micah and pulled him to the back of the house. We peeked through the cracks in the barn wall, and that's when I saw him, not Silas, not one of his thugs, but Micah's uncle riding up the path with 2 other men. One of them I recognized from town Judge Thorne, the territorial official in charge of debt collection and property seizure. He was wearing his black coat, the one he saved for official business. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a shakedown anymore. They were trying to make it legal. Micah went still beside me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't think he'd come himself. The uncle dismounted with practiced clumsiness, like a man who wanted to appear important, but had never worked a day in his life. He called out toward the house, "Micah, come on out, son. Time to come home and settle this properly." Properly, like a stray animal handed off with a receipt. Then Judge Thorne spoke. He raised a scroll in his gloved hand. "This is a lawful guardianship transfer," he said. "The boy is still under his uncle's care. The debt settlement includes custody until age 16. Micah stepped backward, nearly stumbling into the hay. His voice cracked. "He sold me, and now he wants to make it look clean." I stepped forward. Through the open barn doors, I called out, "You can waive your papers all you like. He's not going anywhere." Judge Thorne didn't flinch. "You'd be interfering with a legal process, Mrs. Graves. And aiding in the concealment of a minor tied to debt recovery is a chargeable offense." That's when I realized what they'd done. They'd signed Micah's life away on paper. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about precedent. Make one boy disappear, scare 10 others silent. Micah pulled at my sleeve. "I have a sister," he said, voice trembling. "She's younger, still stuck at that mining camp, the one they were sending me to." My breath caught. I hadn't known. He'd never said. That changed everything. This wasn't just about saving one child anymore. It was about choosing to stop something bigger, something dark and organized. I looked toward the house. Behind that front door on a dusty shelf was a small tin box with $18.72. I'd been saving for when the roof finally caved in. That money wasn't going to fix shingles, but it might pay for a lawyer, or a wire, or a ride into town. Judge Thorne's voice cut through my thoughts. "You have 1 minute to comply." Micah gripped my hand. "I'll go," he whispered. "If they take me, they won't hurt you." I turned to him. "I didn't fight to keep you alive, just to hand you over to men who trade flesh for signatures." Then I stepped out into the yard. The rifle hung from my hands loose, but loaded. Micah's uncle took a half step back when he saw my face. "You want to talk law?" I asked. "Let's talk about what kind of man sells a child to pay his debts." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes were already darting past me, looking for a clean exit. Judge Thorne stepped forward. Last warning. Micah's voice rose behind me, clearer now. She's my family now. Not because of blood, but because she stayed. The judge moved to signal the constables riding behind him. That's when I fired. Not at them, but into the sky. Loud, defiant, final. A silence fell. Not one of fear, but of doubt. Even lawmen can smell the wind when it turns. Judge Thorne scowled, but didn't push. He turned his horse and muttered something to the uncle. They pulled back. For now, Micah stared at me like I'd just fought off a storm with bare hands. I didn't feel brave. I felt old. But something in my chest thudded with life again. We went back inside and barred the door. Micah said, "What if they come back?" I looked out at the empty trail. They will. But next time, we'll be ready. That night, the wind didn't blow. Even the coyotes stayed quiet. It was the kind of stillness that settles before a storm, the kind you feel in your bones before you ever see it. Micah and I spent the evening dragging furniture in front of the windows, locking every door twice, and stacking firewood in the hearth, not for warmth, but for cover. We lit one lantern and kept it low. Then we waited. He sat near the back window with my husband's old pistol in his lap. Looked too big for his hands, but he held it like it meant something. I don't think he'd ever fired a gun in his life. Neither had I, not since the war ended. But we both knew tonight wasn't about aim. It was about resolve. Just past midnight, I saw the torches. They moved in two lines. One from the east trail, the other circling around back. I counted at least 6. Then I saw him, Silas Bragg, right at the front, his scar catching the firelight like a brand. He wasn't here to negotiate. This time, he'd brought enough men to make sure things ended his way. He dismounted at the edge of my yard and called out, "This ain't personal, widow. The boy's marked. You can't change that." I stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. "Then you'd best hope your name isn't carved into whatever happens next." Micah stood behind me, hands shaking but steadying himself against the post. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't turn. "Don't be. Just breathe." Silas laughed. "You really think you can stop us?" He gestured to the others. "All we want is the boy. Give him up and we'll be on our way." I didn't answer. Instead, I fired one shot into the dirt 5 feet from his boots. The horse reared. One of the men cursed. Micah flinched, but I stayed steady. "I've got 11 left," I said, "and I promise they all have names on them." Silas's smile slipped, but he didn't back down. He started walking forward, slow, confident. Micah stepped beside me, lifting the pistol. His voice cracked, but it carried, "If you want to take me, you'll have to shoot through both of us." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something fiercer, pride. Silas stopped just short of the gate. He looked between us like he was doing math bullets versus bodies. Then a new sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats. Fast. Coming from the west ridge. For a second, I thought it was more of them. Then I saw a lantern swinging wildly and the shape of a rider barreling toward us. It was Ira Delgado, an old rancher who lived 2 valleys over. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since he lost his wife, and I lost my sons. But he pulled up next to my porch rifle, already drawn, and said, "You didn't think I'd let them bury 2 more souls on my watch, did you?" Silas swore under his breath. His men hesitated. One by one, they began backing toward their horses. Whatever they'd planned, it didn't account for resistance. Certainly not from a widow and a limping boy. And now a neighbor with a long memory. Silas spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." I raised the rifle one last time. "No, but it's over tonight." He mounted, snarling something I couldn't hear. And then they were gone. Just dust and torchlight trailing into the darkness. Micah sagged against the post. Ira dismounted and put a hand on my shoulder. "You always were too stubborn to die quiet." I didn't answer, but I think I smiled just a little. That night we didn't sleep. None of us did. We kept the rifle by the fire, the pistol under Micah's pillow. And though no more riders came, we listened for them just in case. Come morning, I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the ridge. Micah stepped outside, blinking at the light. He asked me, "Do you think they'll come back?" I didn't lie. They might. But next time we won't be standing alone. Because word travels fast in these parts. And sometimes all it takes to start a wildfire is one woman too tired to back down. The morning after the fire, the world felt still, not empty, not broken, just quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we'd do next. Micah sat on the porch steps, bandaging a scrape on his arm. His hair was sticking up in all directions, and there was soot on his cheek. But I swear, he looked more alive than I had ever seen him. I came out with 2 mugs of coffee. Well, 1 coffee, 1 hot water with a pinch of honey. He took his like it was a prize. Held it in both hands, warming fingers that had once only known cold. We didn't speak for a while. Didn't need to. Later, we walked the property together. Past the patched barn, the broken coop, the rows of dirt where vegetables used to grow. We made a list of what could be fixed, what might grow again. We didn't talk about Silas, or the judge, or the uncle who never came back. Micah asked if I thought we'd ever find his sister. I told him yes, not because I was sure, but because sometimes the only thing a child needs more than truth is belief. I showed him where I used to keep the seed boxes and how to test if the soil still held life. His hands were clumsy but eager, the kind of hands that hadn't built much yet, but would. That afternoon, I found him repairing the gate. Same one he walked through days ago when he was nothing more than a shadow in the wind. Now he hammered each nail with purpose, like he meant to stay, and maybe so did I. That night he fell asleep by the fire again. But this time his hands were dirty from work, not running. And his breath came easy. Before I turned in, I looked back at him. Blanket halfway kicked off, mouth open like a boy dreaming of something warm. A boy who still believed in a tomorrow. I used to think grief would be the last thing I ever felt. But now I feel the weight of something new. Not heavy, just unfamiliar. Hope. If you've ever stood between darkness and a child who needed you, or found yourself needed when you thought you had nothing left, then this story was for you. Subscribe to hear more healing Wild West stories like this one. You're not alone out there.